Si alguien requiere servicio de traducción, lo puede solicitar. En 1983 publicó su primer libro y bajo el nombre de Lars Mu Publishers ha producido alrededor de 600 títulos hasta la fecha. Ha sido profesor en varias universidades en Suiza y el resto de Europa. Es profesor invitado de la Escuela Superior de Diseño de Harvard. Actualmente, Müller es reconocido como el mejor editor de arquitectura del mundo. Agradecemos el apoyo de la Embajada de Suiza y de Centro. Démosle la bienvenida a MEXTRÓPOLI 2019.
Buen día. My presentation is addressed in particular to students and young professionals, assuming you are bright, talented, and hungry. Recently, in conversation with a group of young architects, I claimed that it makes little sense to concentrate only on showing and explaining examples of one's work in lectures when every design practice already has its own portfolio website and people will know about your achievements long before you arrive on stage. Whereas the internet rarely tells us anything about people's convictions, their aspirations and struggles. Would it make sense to present fewer works in lectures but more thoughts instead, or at least to embed the work in a wider context? I do my best to follow this strategy. We can't deny the fact that our lives remain analog, despite the massive changes that IT and the related devices have brought to our everyday routines. Being here as your guest, life as a material system has consequences for my carbon footprint, which is admittedly alarming. Just flying from Europe to Mexico and back adds half a planet to my negative balance. Last year, my consumption was 4.5 planets, and this year won't be any better. I'm worried. As a walking advertisement for an industry that depends so much on the physicality of its product, I struggle to find alternatives to what I have become used to and love doing. Traveling to the world together with my books to Mexico, Shanghai, Tokyo, or New York. Smart and efficient technology is becoming available in airplanes and communication tools. I once tried holding a lecture via Skype. It isn't appealing at all, looking into a camera instead of the eyes of your audience. New technologies will not compensate for my insane mobility. I can still hope that my activities can raise awareness and encourage other people to change their habits. But that's a weak excuse. Reflecting on the world that surrounds us, the obvious physical design of what we see as well as what remains invisible, designer babies or Hubble signals from outer space, we may feel either excited or frightened, or both. The destiny of humankind is progress and growth. Whether we like it or not, we architects and designers are accomplices in the big game. Without arrogance, I can say that I am convinced that we must be ahead of our audience. It is only our leading edge in awareness, knowledge, and experience that makes it legitimate for us to offer solutions and suggestions to others. In trying to find my own position in this game, a way to think independently and act freely, I defined 3 fundamental conditions for my life. Authenticity means knowing who I am and where I come from. It means recalling my earliest memories and realizing that I grew up in a continuum of events in real time. This was a fundamentally analog experience in a social and cultural environment that made me become me. On this basis, we develop our personality and recognize our strengths and acknowledge our weaknesses. My uniqueness is the source of a self-determined life. New media and technology suggests the illusion that there is an identity outside of ourselves. But there is no way to escape your authentic body. Face it and live an authentic life. Life is analog, it happens in real time and without interruption. Authenticity is the aggregate of oneself. Individual integrity is articulated in our beliefs, behavior, and actions, how we live and what we do. Parts of our personalities are given, while other parts are shaped over time. Both parts are precious. They are symbiotic and inseparable. As architects, you must have a high degree of awareness for authenticity. It determines your ability to think for others and to anticipate the consequences of what you do. If we recognize the world as an analog totality defined by physicality, by volume and weight, and not least by our fragile bodies, we become aware of the systems that rule the whole. I see this awareness and the understanding of systems not only as a precondition for an authentic life, but also as a significant driver of change. We interact daily with and within systems, starting with our own body, our digestive system, our nervous system, the cardiovascular system. On the other end of the scale, we observe the solar system and search for the master system beyond. Communication systems, control systems, trade, finance, democracy, from the simplest to the most complex, all systems depend on the precise interaction of their components. Systems are vulnerable. As a boy, I took apart my alarm clock to observe its functioning and discover the secret of its tick-tocking. There was this little balance wheel which was moved by a tiny torsion spring, which of course, once I had loosened it, I never got to work again. Once the mechanical world fully satisfied our joy of discovery. And for a very long time, our tools of communication expressed their functionality with typical sounds. Some remember this one. Anyway, not so anymore. The blank face of our most used device doesn't reveal any of its many functions. But of course, information technology and all electronic devices depend on sophisticated mathematical systems. How does this express itself in our discipline? Systemic thinking is inherent in every design process. In fact, it is a very human approach to analyzing and understanding the nature of a problem. The success of the result depends on the completeness of our observations. Lacking a fundamental grasp of systems will in general necessarily lead to poor results. Citizenship is the third of my conditions for understanding and accepting the responsibility I bear as a designer. Being a citizen means participating in the enduring process of building, shaping, and sustaining society, entailing a fundamental understanding of all communities as the social and cultural drivers of society. Rural, suburban, or urban communities are the places where we shape society through interaction and where the principles of equality, diversity, inclusivity, and solidarity are lived and practiced. Here we can experience new models of living together and define the rules we want the government and lawmakers to abide by in governing our country. Thinking global, acting local, as Buckminster Fuller urged us to do already in 1929, will allow us to behave as citizens in our closest communities, our nations, and as inhabitants of the global village. This is the analog reality, and authenticity, system awareness, and citizenship are the premises for change. It is the destiny of humankind, due to its intelligence, to strive for change and progress. More than ever, we must do so with the utmost of mindfulness and care, so as not to endanger the great achievements of civilization. As architects, you are more aware than many others. You are in the vanguard of the movement. You are the transformers of new achievements in science and technology. Being an architect today means much more than giving form to buildings. As you create, you end up shaping the context as well. So, arm yourself with knowledge, wit, and humor. Take advantage of the marvelous community you are part of and build bridges to other disciplines. Collaborate, activate. It is by far not only climate change that demands our comprehension and action. Democracy is equally endangered, as is the concept of human rights. Take action and don't leave it to politics. When it comes to my own activity as a designer and publisher, I must confess that it is a challenging task to live up to all these ideals and ethical principles in daily practice. You will develop stubbornness to help you withstand the many compromises along the way to your self-fulfillment. Looking back at my younger years, I was lucky to be idealistic and naive enough to accept two strong personalities as my role models. Swiss graphic designer Josef Müller-Brockmann taught me the formal basis and ethical rules of design. And Richard Paul Lose, a Swiss artist in the constructivist style and a staunch socialist, was my ideological master. Political convictions are difficult to express in design or architecture. And yet, what is factual and functional about Swiss design is very accommodating to my views on society. What is more, this attitude towards design gives my limited talents both an anchor and a direction. Another master, the Dutch designer Wim Krauwel, must take responsibility for me becoming a publisher. His notion that of all printed matter, only the book is meant to last made me adjust my focus. For many years, my design studio supported my publishing enterprise. financially and allowed me to follow my principles without compromise. To compensate for the fact that there are far more fine professionals in architecture and design than there are good clients, I prefer to choose my clients myself rather than waiting for commissions. I try to convince them with my superior concept and good design. I cultivate a culture of saying no. Of course, a harsh no is rude, but if you add a brief explanation, you are released with respect and your yes becomes more valuable. Following an early decision, I kept my business small enough to keep control over all decisions and processes. I named the company after myself and don't hide behind a fantasy name. I take the blame and pride alike for what I'm doing. At Lars Mu Publishers, we maintain a flat hierarchy and allow for leadership through competence. In an industry where income is limited, other benefits must provide the incentive. Of the 20 to 25 titles we produce per year, at least half must be initiated by me or developed with my participation and will be designed in-house, while the other half may be the result of my positive response to proposals that correspond to my personal interest and contribute to the overall program. I don't consider publishing a service to the author, but rather a partnership with the goal of offering the best to the reader in the meaningful context of our program. Our editors and copy editors must commit themselves to the motto, "The editor is the advocate of the reader." In this sense, I reject the trend towards self-publishing, which often spares the labor of editing. Over the years, I have dedicated many books to the history of the Swiss modernist movement. I was partly influenced by my mentors, but also driven by my own research for understanding and by the timeless values I personally see in some of the movement's achievements. For example, the typeface Helvetica, an all-time favorite of many architects as well. It is a reliable companion in the hands of dilettantes. Now and again, I have published reprints. Oh, those are the dilettantes, though. Now and again, I have published reprints of rare publications from the avant-garde movement that deserve to survive in physical form. We have recently published a collection of reprints on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the Bauhaus. It is often said, and certainly true, that the future needs the past. The paradigm shift brought about by the digital transformation has detached many people from history. But the critical assessment of the opportunities and risks of the foreseeable future calls for engaging with the history of modernity so we can better understand it and move beyond it if necessary. 20 years ago, when the independent publishing industry began to decline and many bookstores and small publishers gave up under the pressure of Amazon, I remained stoic and over the years developed a survival concept, which, for example, includes a series of pop-up stores. Last autumn, I was invited by Travesias here in Mexico City. In April, we will make a stop in Beirut, Lebanon. I reacted also to the change by focusing more on architecture books, which had the most reliable market. I took pleasure in observing the different ways architecture can be presented through photography while paying specific attention to the character and atmosphere of buildings and published early books by architects who I thought were interesting. Some of these books have set new standards in their category. For example, the first book on the work of Swiss architect Peter Zumthor. When Zumthor realized his spa in Vals in 1997 and was on the verge of international fame, the most respected architectural critics were offering their writing for the book and posed a dilemma for the architect. I convinced him to write the book himself and to make it a piece by and not about him. All of Zumthor's buildings up to then were rephotographed during a single summer by Hélène Binet. Her analog black and white photography, eschewing wide angles and using daylight only, matched our ambitions perfectly. Together with the author's text and straightforward typography and graphics, they contributed to a radically dark yet warm book that resonates with the architecture's own characteristics. My collaboration with Hélène Binet continued and includes several books on the architecture of Zaha Hadid, Peter Eisenman, and others. Okay. In dealing with the many images that often come together in a book, the wall has proven to be my most reliable working tool in the analog process of bookmaking. Sometimes I lure busy authors into my studio and compose their books with them. The design of the book will casually adapt to the content, while the cover design remains my privilege. Contrary to the rules of marketing, I usually forego the visual representation of the content and prefer typographic covers and clear colors, if not black and white. I also search for ways to treat the surface of the thin cardboard okay. Too many. Okay. I also search for ways to treat the surface of the thin cardboard in a way that creates a three-dimensional impression and a tactile sensation on what I call the facade of the book. So, there are exceptions where the content requests visual representation on the cover. Now, architecture, even more than other disciplines, has successfully incorporated the advances in digital technology during all phases of its development. Smart software is used to manage complex planning and execution processes, to control the machines that manufacture individual components, or to streamline the process of building. It is only the idea, the initial sketch, the genuine act of designing that still resists this development. The best architects know that the shortest way from brain to image is through your hand, and that no software should be allowed to replace your personal signature. My interest in architectural drawings was aroused by Louis Kahn's sketches, and I asked architect friends for their sketchbooks, which I faithfully reproduced. Stephen Hall's daily exercises with watercolors, Eduardo Soto de Mura's bold ink strokes, Su Fujimoto's delicate thin lines, or Wang Shu's impeccably drawn bird eye views. I hope to encourage young architects to value their sketchbooks. It is not the sketchbook brand that matters. Architecture and related disciplines are facing monumental challenges today. In the area of urban planning and urban design, considering population growth, densification and infrastructural complexity, economic pressure and environmental regulations, you must find answers to a growing number of social and ethical questions. Gentrification and displacement pressure in emerging cities, aging societies that require new structures and forms of living, and affordable housing. On top of it all, you are responsible for delivering the appropriate aesthetic and for smart and unseen architectural forms that offer users and inhabitants a sense of inclusion and identity. A truly Herculean task that can only be achieved through raising the social and political consciousness of all those involved. I support this shift in focus with books on urban, ecological, and social topics. At some point in my career, I had the desire to take a step out of the niche of beauty, and I added society as a category to my publishing program. I call the type of book I developed in this context a visual reader, referring to content represented through images arranged to evoke questions and lead to engaged reading despite today's rapidly changing reading habits. I adapted this model to such topics as human rights, democracy, climate change, and water. A book on systems is in the making. Working on books of this kind gives me a feeling of relevance and social responsibility. Always remember, you are not only architects, you are also citizens. I was told yesterday that without taking appropriate measures, the water system in Mexico City will collapse in 2050, right? Probably the traffic system will collapse before. And remember, in 20 years from now, your generation will rule the world. I am counting on you. Thank you very much.